We're coming to you from the CoinDesk podcast studio presented by BitGo. Founded in 2013 with the first institutional-grade Bitcoin wallet, BitGo is the gold standard in custody, staking, and settlement. Today, BitGo supports over 800 coins and processes 20% of all Bitcoin transactions by value. Check them out at bitgo.com. Welcome back to CoinDesk Live from Consensus 2024. I'm Jen Sadassi here with my co-host Renato Mariotti. Our next guest is the SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jen. Great to be here. Of course, I'm going to give you my disclaimer, which is my views are my own, not necessarily those of the SEC or my fellow commissioners.
Well, it's great to meet you IRL. Much like Renato and I, we've only spoken on the Zoom call, so it's great to be here in real life with you. Got to get your reaction to the conference. The theme over the last 3 days has really been policy and regulation here within these walls. Talk to us about the conversations you've been having.
Well, I'm always sad to hear that the theme of a crypto conference is policy and regulation. I long for the day when the theme of a crypto conference is actually the technology. But, you know, I've had conversations similar to the ones I've had over the past several years, which is that we need to get the policy right so that people can focus on the technology. And there's a lot of work to go still on that. There's some positive shoots that we're seeing in the regulatory landscape, but we need to see more.
You know, one thing that I've heard a lot about throughout the conference is concern from, attendees here about regulation via enforcement, about the aggressive tack that the SEC has taken in enforcement matters. Does it concern you as a commissioner that so many in the industry are viewing the SEC as an adversary or as a obstacle to progress?
No, it certainly does. And I mean, I think I've had some similar concerns to what you've heard, that we're using enforcement as the primary way to make policy in this area. And that's just not the most effective way. It's not effective for the industry, but it's also not effective for us as a regulator with limited resources. And so I think we really need a reset. We need to engage people in policy making whose job is not enforcement, but whose job is actually policy making. And that's a different set of people at the SEC.
It seems that there is, at times, different approach taken by the SEC and CFTC. There's been some differences of opinion about whether, for example, certain tokens are securities. Is there a coordination with the CFTC, and how do you see potential sharing of regulatory responsibility between those two agencies going forward?
Yeah, I mean, crypto is not the first place where the CFTC and the SEC have had to have conversations, and sometimes very difficult ones, about where the jurisdictional lines lie. But I was talking to someone yesterday, and I think the person raised a really good point, which is that ultimately it doesn't matter whether the jurisdiction was with us or with the CFTC. We both work for the American people, and so we really want to get it right. I personally have been involved in conversations around jurisdiction related to security-based swaps and swaps under the Dodd-Frank Act, and I think we can have similar conversations here. I was on stage yesterday with Commissioner Mersinger from the CFTC, and I think she and I approach these issues very similarly. We'd like to sit down together, have roundtables, talk about some of these issues. And so we could start doing that tomorrow. There's no problem to that. And would some of those conversations be hard? Absolutely. But I think it could move us forward much faster than each agency working on it on its own.
Commissioner, I've heard from people around the conference that you've been really open to speaking with different projects and different folks while you were here. What are you learning from people at the conference? What kinds of questions are they asking you about the SEC and regulation to come?
Well, I think people are constantly looking for, some light at the end of the tunnel and hoping that we'll get to a better place. But yesterday, for example, I put out a model for an innovation sandbox. And I think that kind of thing would be interesting to a lot of people because it would allow them to start trying things here in the U.S. And it would be a streamlined approach. And I think that's what people are looking for. They want to have a way to positively engage with the SEC. This is, again, the same kind of theme that I've been hearing for a long time, which is we want to work with you and we want to come in, but we want to know that this is going to be a conversation that leads us to be able to actually do something in the marketplace in a way that's consistent with the securities laws.
One focus has been throughout this conference, at least that I've been hearing from market participants, is about Fit 21, their hope for there to be a regulatory framework. Obviously, that's up to a different branch of our government, the legislative branch. But why hasn't the SEC used the authority it does have to promulgate regulations in the meantime so that there's more certainty for the market?
I mean, I think that's such a great question, because this is when Congress comes in often, and this is not only with respect to crypto, but sometimes the SEC has authority and chooses not to use it. And Congress sort of nudges us and tries to encourage us to use our exemptive authority. I'm thinking in terms of small business capital formation. That's another area where often we don't take the steps we need to. So Congress comes in and says, all right, well, we're going to tell you have to do this. And I think we're seeing the same kind of thing happen with crypto. We had the opportunity to try to set out a productive regulatory approach. Congress finally said, okay, we're going to come in and we're going to outline this for you. And I'm always grateful for Congress's input. I mean, they're my boss, and so it's really nice to hear where they want authority to lie. But I do think we could have done some of the hard work, and it's unfortunate that we didn't.
What was the obstacle there, in your view, or can you tell us?
I mean, I think there's a view that the existing securities laws work just fine in this space, and I came into the SEC thinking that we didn't need to make adjustments. But as I learned more about the industry and about what people were trying to do, I realized there isn't actually a great fit, and there's some adjustments that we need to make. And I think it's a lack of willingness to sit down and have those serious conversations with seriously thinking not only about the law and how the law has developed over time, but also about what people are actually trying to do, and marrying those two things together. It's actually quite a bit more complicated than I think many people are willing to acknowledge. And that's why we need to do the hard work. We have the expertise at the SEC to do that work. It just hasn't been done.
I asked the Texas state regulator this. Renato told me earlier on the show that a lot of his clients are looking to go overseas because of the lack of regulatory clarity here. Is this a conversation that you're having behind the scenes at the SEC? Is this something that's being discussed? How do we keep innovation here in the U.S.?
I mean, it's certainly something that I've talked to a lot of folks in the industry about, people who are either thinking about leaving the U.S., or I talked recently to someone who said, you know what, I don't want to leave the U.S. I will build my thing here, but I'm having to wait. And that's bad too, right? We want people to be trying to push forward their ideas. In terms of whether or not it's a big concern, I'd say many people in Washington don't really care that much about it, because they don't think that there's a lot of value in the technology underlying this. And so, to be fair to them, they've seen a lot of fraud in the name of crypto. And so maybe it would be better if it just doesn't happen in the US, if it happens outside. And it's hard to sort of pull those people back and say, yes, there has been a lot of bad activity, but there's also a core of something that is interesting. I'm a regulator, not a technologist, but I would like to see that play out in the United States. I would like the U.S. to be the place that people, when they think about where do I want to build a company, or where do I want to do my development, I want that to be in the U.S. And I think we have a lot of work to do to make that, to make the U.S. the most attractive place to be.
Yeah, I think one of the more frustrating things for industry participants is that there's not an avenue by which they can come forward and say, here's what we are trying to do. Give us guidance. Are we compliant? Are we able to get a safe harbor or report ourselves and say, this is the activity we're doing? How can we do this in a legal manner? And at times, even attempts to do so have been rebuffed. There's been enforcement actions taken. Is there any movement within the SEC to try to provide more guidance to the industry, or at least give a reprieve for industry participants that are trying to get some guidance on the front end?
I mean, we haven't made a lot of progress on that front. I will say, though, that the micro sandbox that I put out yesterday, I think could be a path to getting to more positive interaction between the industry and between the SEC, in a way that also allows the public to see what's going on. So it would be transparent. what people were doing, and it would also give the SEC staff time to work with these projects in a way that I think would be productive. So I hear that need, and I think this is why I've been thinking about what could we do, and this is the idea that I came up with. I welcome feedback on it. I put it out. It's on the SEC website. People can give me feedback, rip it apart, tell me what doesn't work, what would work.
Tell us a little bit more about the sandbox that you published yesterday.
So the idea is that you could, we, the SEC, would decide which activities could qualify for the sandbox, and we'd set ceilings on the number of customers and the dollar amount. Then projects could come in, and it's not limited to crypto, but could certainly be used by crypto projects. You'd come in, you'd say, here's what we're going to do. Here are the conditions we'll operate under. Those conditions could be drawn from a foreign sandbox you're participating in, or they could be just conditions that you set yourself. And then you put a notice out. You can start operating within 10 days. And then you're working toward permanent relief. That's a 2-year sort of grace period there. And then you're working toward more permanent no action or exemptive relief. And so the idea is you wouldn't want to put forth meaningless conditions because you're trying to prove to the SEC that you have an approach that will be protective of investors and the markets, but also will allow you to be commercially successful. So that's the idea. It gives you a platform to have a good, solid discussion with the staff and to produce some data as you're going along about how well whatever you're trying to do is working.
Right. It sounds like it's actually trying to do what I was suggesting a moment ago. In other words, giving a pathway for people in the industry to engage with SEC staff and try to develop a path forward for themselves that gives them at least some certainty in the short term that they're not going to be facing an enforcement action in the midst of doing so.
Exactly. Yep.
Now, one thing I have to say that is I admire is the fact that you're here, not only a consensus, which I think is important because you're sort of showing the industry that they can meet their regulator and you're coming into an environment where there's a lot of questions and concerns, but you're actually here on CoinDesk TV as well answering our questions. I really appreciate that. What is the biggest thing you've learned from talking to folks here at the conference and getting, in terms of a different perspective on what's going on the ground?
I mean, I've been having these conversations with people for a long time, but every time I come to a conference like this, where I'm meeting with people who are developing things and want to build things, it really does kind of make my heart stop a little bit and realize to be in what it must be like to be in the shoes of those people who have this idea. They're just trying to do something that's technically interesting, and always in the back of their mind is this question of, is this something that's going to cross a line at the SEC either today or 5 years from now or 10 years from now? And that kind of uncertainty is really detrimental to innovation. And so every time I meet with people that, I get that pit in my stomach because I feel what it must be like to be in their shoes.
If we come back to the sandbox now, I know that there have been other regulatory sandboxes proposed over the years. What needs to happen for this to be something that the industry can actually participate in the United States? What does that roadmap look like?
So what I see as the roadmap is if I could get my colleagues to agree to this, we could put this out as basically a proposed rule. So it would be a rule that would set this new sandbox up. We'd identify in that initial rulemaking proposal the activities that we wanted to initially include, and we could ask for input on other activities to be included. And we'd also ask for input on the ceilings of the activity limits. We'd get that feedback, and then we could put it into place. So this is not something that we could turn on tomorrow, but I think realistically we could have it up and running in 6 months.
What is the biggest misconception that people in this space have about the SEC now that you've been spending all this time talking to people here?
I mean, I think there are a lot of it's interesting that people in this industry know a lot more about the SEC than they probably ever dreamed they would. But there are a lot of really unusual features of this agency. We're a 5-member commission. That means that it takes a majority to make a change. I think that some of that is a little mysterious. A lot of actions are actually taken at the staff level on delegated authority. That's something that's also a little puzzling to people. And then I think always another big thing is that people think that the SEC is thinking about crypto all the time. In reality, we have so many other issues on the agenda, and so this is just one issue that we think about. That's always a little surprising to people, I think.
I got to ask you about the approval of the spot Ether ETF. You can't be here and us not ask about what happened. It really felt like nothing was going to happen. There was sudden movement at the agency, a lot of speculation going on about what was happening behind closed doors. What happened?
I mean, I think that it's not that surprising of a development when you think about the legal history the recent legal history that we had with being told that our approach to the Bitcoin ETP was not consistent with the law. And then when you line up the ETH ETP alongside the Bitcoin ETP, the facts are very similar. I wouldn't want to have us have a similar legal opinion coming out of a judicial opinion coming out of the court. So from my perspective, we didn't really have a whole lot of choice, just as we didn't have a whole lot of choice on the Bitcoin ETP. I know the timing, people were wondering what would happen and when it would happen, but realistically, we didn't have that many options.
We saw Ether staking removed from some of the applications. Is that an indication into maybe how the SEC might be looking at staking in the future?
That I can't comment on.
All right. Commissioner Peirce, thank you so much for joining us here. We hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you both for having me. Take care.
That was SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce.